I just wanted to say I'm very happy that it's all over. Been a long time waiting for this. Really happened with the prosecution team. They've really done a great job.
Colorado, 1984. The oldest family massacre cold case. Finally solved. And the arrest? It shocked an entire community. In January of 1984, a young family of 4 was attacked inside their own home in Aurora, Colorado. While they slept, something almost exactly like this had already happened 11 days earlier. And it wasn't even the third attack. There was a monster moving through Denver. And nobody had connected the dots. If you're new here, hit that like button and subscribe, because Crime Watch Hub digs into cases like this every single week. And trust me, you do not want to miss where this one goes. Okay, stay with me. Because before this becomes a 34-year manhunt, it starts with something painfully small. A phone that just keeps ringing. Monday morning, January 16, 1984, Aurora, Colorado. Connie Bennett is 50 years old, and she's calling her son's house. First call, no answer. She waits 20 minutes. Calls again. Nothing. Now here's the thing. Her son should be awake. It's a work day. He's always up early. By the third call, they're still sleeping, stops making sense. So Connie does what mothers do. She grabs her keys and drives over herself. The house is on East Center Drive. She knocks. No answer. So she lets herself in, with her own key, and at 8 in the morning, that house is completely silent. What Connie found inside answered why nobody picked up the phone. And it's the kind of discovery no parent ever recovers from. Her son Bruce Bennett, 27 years old, found near the stairwell. His wife Deborah, 26, in the bedroom. And their daughter Melissa, just 2 days from her 8th birthday, found in the room she shared with her little sister. All 3 gone, attacked overnight while the family slept. I'm not going further than that. The details exist in the case file. They don't need to exist here. This channel doesn't work that way. But there's one more person in that house, and this is where the story refuses to end. In the girl's bedroom, a firefighter finds Vanessa, 3 years old, and she's alive. Barely. She's rushed to Children's Hospital in Denver. Severe head trauma. A shattered jaw. Injuries so serious, doctors sat the family down and told them not to expect a miracle. Emergency surgery. Then a coma that stretched on for weeks. Nobody could promise this little girl would wake up. She did. But think about what that means for investigators. Their only living witness is 3 years old, too young to understand what happened, too injured to say a word. The one person who survived that night couldn't tell them anything, so the case falls entirely on the evidence. Now watch this, because what police found at that scene tells you exactly who they were dealing with. First, no forced entry. Anywhere. No broken windows. No damaged locks. Nothing. So how did he get in? Simple. The garage door was standing open. And here's what you need to understand about 1984 Aurora. This was a brand new suburb. Young families, starter homes, basketball hoops over garage doors. Everybody waved at everybody. And almost nobody locked anything. That garage door stayed open some nights. Forgotten. Lost in the shuffle of groceries, homework, bath time running long. One small task that always lost to something louder. On this street, that was normal. And someone out there was counting on it. Second piece of evidence. The weapon was gone. Based on the injuries, investigators believed it was a hammer. But whoever did this took it with him. Hold on to that detail, because that weapon choice is about to connect things nobody saw coming. Third, outside near the garage, boot prints, pressed into fresh snow. Leading away from the property, evidence technicians spent hours in that house, photographing everything, bagging surfaces. And here's what's wild. Some of what they collected that day wouldn't matter for another 34 years. They had no idea they were preserving the answer. Detectives canvassed the entire block, and they got nothing. Nobody heard a sound. Nobody saw a strange car. Nobody remembered a single unusual thing. A tip line opened. It filled up fast. Suspicious neighbors, delivery drivers, ex-boyfriends. Detectives ran down every single one. Every single one led nowhere. So who was this family? Because that question mattered to investigators too. Bruce Bennett was a Navy veteran, disciplined, focused. Most evenings after the girls went down, he was at the kitchen table studying, working toward becoming an air traffic controller, a man building something. Deborah was the engine of the household, quicker to laugh, keeping the family schedule running, underneath all of Bruce's study guides. Just 1 year earlier, in 1983, they'd saved enough for a down payment, bought their very first home together. A young couple, barely into a marriage and a mortgage, doing everything right, no enemies, no debts worth killing over, no motive that made any sense at all. Nothing was stolen. So this wasn't a robbery. There was no connection to the attacker. So this wasn't personal, which left investigators staring at the worst possible answer. A stranger picked this house. The funeral drew a crowd past capacity. Neighbors, co-workers, complete strangers. And then, the case went quiet. An evidence box on a shelf, a case number in a growing stack, and a house on East Center Drive that people started avoiding after dark. But here's what nobody in Aurora knew. Not the neighbors, not the news, not even the detectives working the scene. Something almost identical had already happened, 11 days earlier. And it wasn't even the third attack. Real quick, if cold cases like this one grab you, hit subscribe right now. Crime Watch Hub digs through decades-old files, and court records, and forensic breakthroughs, to show you exactly how cases like this finally break. That's all we do here. And this one is just getting started. Because there wasn't one crime scene in the Denver metro that January. There were 4. Take a look at this for a moment. Because to understand what happened on East Center Drive, you have to rewind the calendar. 11 days back, to a completely different house. January 4th, 1984. Still Aurora. The middle of the night. A married couple, Kim and Jim Henshield, asleep in their own bed. And someone is inside their home. They were attacked while they slept, with a hammer, both of them. And here's the first miracle of this story. They survived. Both of them. Though neither one ever walked away from that night the same. Now pay attention to this detail, because it tells investigators something important. Outside the house, Kim's purse turns up. Rummaged through, and abandoned. Just left there. Think about what that means. If this was a robbery, the money's gone, and so is he. But the purse was picked through, and dumped. Like whatever he came for was never in that purse at all. Whatever this was about, it wasn't money. Now watch this. Because the night isn't over. That same night, across town, a woman named Donna Holm comes home. She's been grocery shopping. She pulls in, steps into her own garage, and he's already there, waiting. She was beaten badly and assaulted. Her boyfriend found her later that night. Her injuries required immediate hospitalization. She survived. But 2 attacks, 1 night, same city. And notice something here. The garage. Again, not a window, not a back door. The garage. the one entry point nobody thought to guard. But at Donna Holmes' scene, something was different. And this is the kind of detail detectives live for. The hammer was left behind. At the Henshield house. He kept it. Here, he dropped it and walked away. Why does that matter? Because a weapon left at a scene is physical evidence. It can be photographed, processed, stored. It becomes part of the record. And in this case, the record is everything. File that away. 6 days pass. January 10th. And now the pattern breaks its own rules. This time it's not Aurora. It's Lakewood, a different suburb, west side of Denver, different police department. Remember that part. It's about to matter more than anything. Patricia Smith, 50 years old, an interior decorator. She shared her townhome with her daughter and her grandchildren, 3 generations under one roof. And she wasn't attacked at night. She was attacked in broad daylight, in the middle of eating lunch. Patricia didn't survive. Her daughter found her hours later, in a home that, until that afternoon, had never felt like a place to fear. And once again, the hammer was left at the scene. Here's what makes Patricia's story hit different. Her whole career was built on trust. An interior decorator, someone families invited. Inside their homes, every single day. And someone walked into hers, uninvited, in the middle of the day. So let's line this up, the way investigators eventually would. January 4th. A couple attacked in their sleep. Both survive. Same night, a woman ambushed in her garage. She survives. January 10th. A woman attacked in daylight. She does not. January 15th. An entire family. 3 lives taken. 1 child barely holding on. 4 attacks. 23 days. And look at the trajectory. Each attack, more violent than the one before it. Night attacks become day attacks. Survivors become victims. One target becomes a whole family. This wasn't random chaos. This was escalation. And escalation like that only ever ends one way. It ended on East Center Drive. Now, investigators slowly started building a profile, piece by piece. And honestly, it was solid work. A young man, likely early 20s, physically strong, comfortable with tools, comfortable with manual labor. The kind of man who walks through an open garage, like it's second nature. The hammer wasn't brought from home. It was a workingman's weapon. And robbery? Never the point. Valuables sat untouched. At nearly every scene. Hold on to that profile. Because eventually, it gets tested against a real name. And you'll want to remember just how close the guesswork came. Meanwhile, the press caught on. Denver news stations started using one name for whoever was doing this. The hammer attacker. Reporters had no idea how literally accurate that name would turn out to be. For a few weeks, people across the Denver suburbs changed. Garage doors got double-checked. Locks got used for the first time in years. And then, like it always does, the fear faded. The story fell off the 6 o'clock news, and the garage doors stayed open again. But now, here's the part of this story that should genuinely frustrate you. Because the biggest obstacle in this case wasn't the killer being clever. It was paperwork. In 1984, there was no shared database, no CODIS, no regional network. Nothing. Aurora Police had their files. Lakewood Police had theirs. 2 departments, 20 minutes apart, each holding pieces of what was clearly one case, with no real mechanism to lay those pieces side by side. A detective in Aurora couldn't just pull up Lakewood's evidence. It was paper files, phone calls that may or may not happen, and hope. Now stretch that problem across state lines. Because this man had a record. Arrests already scattered across Florida and California, long before Colorado. A documented pattern of trouble. Invisible. Because every state kept its own drawer. One continuous case. 3 separate filing cabinets. And no one holding the whole picture. That's how a man does this. And simply drives away. Except, he didn't stay invisible. Not completely. Because 5 days after the Bennett murders, hundreds of miles from Colorado, in a small Arizona town, he made a mistake. And 11 days after that family was killed, police in Arizona already had a man sitting in custody. They just had no idea who they were holding. Every case like this hinges on one mistake. One moment where the invisible man becomes visible. And in this story, that moment happened in Arizona. Of all places. January 27, 1984. Kingman, Arizona. A small desert town. Hundreds of miles from Denver. 12 days after the Bennett family was killed. A man named Roy Williams is asleep in his home. And he's attacked. Not with a hammer this time, with a 25-pound piece of granite. Against every possible odd, Roy Williams survived. And here's where this case finally catches a break. A patrol officer working the area notices footprints outside the house. Fresh ones. And nearby, there's a stranger. A man nobody in town recognizes. The officer looks at the prints. Looks at the man's shoes. They match. That's it. That's the whole break. No task force, no manhunt. One patrol officer, paying attention to the ground. The man goes into custody. Suspicion of attempted murder and burglary. So who were they holding? 23 years old. A drifter. Picking up construction jobs and odd labor work, wherever he happened to land. Now go back to that profile, the one Colorado investigators were building. Young male, early 20s. Physically capable, comfortable with manual labor, comfortable with tools. 23. Construction worker, strong enough to swing a slab of granite. The guesswork was nearly a photograph. But nobody in Arizona knew about that profile. Why would they? To Kingman police, this was one man who hurt one stranger in one house, in a state that had never once heard the name Bennett. And here's the detail that should have changed everything. Records later showed this man had obtained a Colorado driver's license. The previous summer, sit with that. A Colorado driver's license. He wasn't passing through Colorado. He was living there, working construction there, standing on job sites, next to people who had no idea what he might be doing with his evenings. The paperwork proving his connection to Colorado existed. It was sitting in a government system the entire time. But in 1984, no alarm goes off, no screen flashes. Nobody in Aurora gets a phone call. So there he sat, in a Kingman jail cell, and for one brief moment, this entire story could have ended. Less than 2 weeks after the worst of it. A rock, a footprint, a man in handcuffs. It didn't end. And what happens next is almost hard to believe. The Kingman jail was overcrowded, too overcrowded to hold him long, so he was transferred to a detention center in St. George, Utah, to wait out his Arizona case there. While in custody, he told investigators a story, said he'd hitchhiked out of Colorado in the cab of a trucker's rig, a story nobody could verify, and nobody had a reason to push. Because nobody was asking him a single question about Aurora, or Lakewood, or a family on East Center Drive. Then comes August 9th, 1984. Deputies load him into a transport van. The plan is simple. Drive him from Utah back to Arizona for a scheduled court hearing. Routine. Done 1,000 times. Somewhere along the route, the van stops. Henderson, Nevada. A bathroom break. And he runs. Now here's what he does with his freedom. Not hiding. Not disappearing quietly into the desert. That same night, he breaks into a nearby home. A married couple. In their bedroom. Attacked with an axe handle. Both beaten severely. Hours into being free. And this is what he chose. The pattern didn't pause. Not even for one night. He didn't get far, though. 2 days later, park rangers patrolling near Lake Mead spot him and take him in. 48 hours. That's the longest he'd be free for the rest of his life. A Nevada jury convicted him for the escape and for the attack on that couple, and the judge left no room for doubt. 110 years. A sentence so long. Arizona looked at its own pending case, the Roy Williams attack, and quietly dismissed it. Why spend the money prosecuting a man who's already buried under a century? And just like that, he vanished into the Nevada prison system. A number, a file, one inmate among thousands. Here's the brutal irony. Colorado spent decades hunting a ghost, and the whole time, the man was in a cage, fed, housed, counted twice a day, by the government. The system had him. The system just didn't know what it had. Now, you might be asking the obvious question. Why not just test the DNA? And this is where you have to understand what 1984 actually looked like. For forensic science, DNA testing barely existed. It wasn't a tool in crime labs. It was theory, living in academic papers. The evidence from the Bennett house and from Patricia Smith's home sat in storage, holding answers no technology on Earth could read yet. Fast forward 18 years, 2002. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation runs new analysis on both scenes, and they confirm something huge. The DNA from the Bennett home and the DNA from Patricia Smith's home belonged to one man, the same man. 2 attacks, 6 days apart. Scientifically linked, for the first time. But here's the catch, and it's a painful one. Confirming 2 crimes share a perpetrator is not the same as knowing who he is. There was no name attached, no sample to compare against, nothing to run it into. A DNA profile with no match is just an extremely precise description of a stranger. So the profile sat in a database, waiting for 11 more years, until 2013, when a lever finally appeared. Not a detective's hunch, not a deathbed confession. Something far more boring than that, and far more powerful. A policy change, written by people who never heard of this case, was about to solve it. Nobody makes movies about state legislation. No true crime documentary opens on a committee hearing. But I need you to stay with me here, because the most important weapon in this entire case was a piece of paperwork. Nevada passes a new law. Convicted felons in state custody must submit DNA samples. Simple, unglamorous, part of a national push happening everywhere. But that law only reached forward. New convictions. New samples. Men convicted decades ago, untouched. Then, 2016. Nevada's Attorney General goes further. The requirement becomes retroactive, reaching backward. Deep into the prison system, testing men convicted long before DNA science even existed as a working tool. Read that carefully. Men who went inside in the 80s, when their crime scenes couldn't speak, were about to be tested by technology that could finally hear them. No press conference, no headlines, just a swab, a backlog, and a list of inmates to process. Meanwhile, back in Colorado, one man never let go. Detective Stephen Connor. Remember, he was among the first officers at East Center Drive in 1984, a young detective back then. Not young anymore. Through decades, through retirements around him, through changes in leadership above him, Connor kept pulling that file, reviewing it, refusing to let it gather dust. That kind of persistence never makes the news. But understand something. Cold cases don't survive on evidence alone. They survive because one person keeps refusing to forget. And for this case, that person was Connor. For 34 years, Connor had the question. Nevada, without knowing it, was holding the answer. So the swabs get processed. Inmate after inmate. One sample among thousands in a backlog. Nothing special about any single one of them. One of those samples belonged to a man serving 110 years. The man from the transport van. The man from Lake Mead. His DNA enters the national database, and the match comes back within a single day. One day. 34 years of nothing. Dead ends. Cold trails. A profile with no name. And then 24 hours. Done. The unknown man from the Bennett home. The unknown man from Patricia Smith's home. Confirmed as one person in 2002. Nameless for 16 more years. Now, he had a name. Summer of 2018. The phone rings on Detective Connor's end this time. And this call gets answered. The stranger in the database, the ghost Colorado hunted for 3 decades, was a 57-year-old inmate sitting in a Nevada prison cell. His name, Alex Christopher Ewing, 23 years old in January 1984. A drifter, a construction worker, a Colorado driver's license in his past. Every single box of that profile, checked. The man they already caught, the man who ran from that van, the man Arizona let go of, had been sitting in state custody since before Vanessa Bennett turned 4. Real quick, pause right here. If you've made it this deep, you're exactly who this channel is for. Crime Watch Hub covers one thing: cold cases and the exact breakthroughs that crack them. The DNA laws, the database hits, the detectives who won't quit. Hit subscribe now. Because cases are still breaking, and we cover them the moment they do. Now, Colorado investigators wanted to look this man in the eye, so they traveled to Nevada and sat across from Alex Ewing. They showed him a photograph from Patricia Smith's home, and his reaction was physical. He visibly recoiled. Then they told him the science, his DNA, matched to evidence from both scenes. And his entire response was one line. He said there had to be a mistake. That's it. No explanation. No account of his whereabouts. Across 2 separate interviews. He acknowledged living in the Denver area in 1984. Acknowledged working construction and plumbing jobs there. But offered no explanation for how his DNA reached either home. 34 years of hunting. And it ends not with a confession, but with a shrug. Colorado didn't need a confession. Prosecutors issued an arrest warrant. 13 separate counts. 6 charges of first-degree murder. 2 for each victim. Attempted murder for the attack on Vanessa. Additional charges tied to the assaults. Burglary, plus sentencing enhancers for a crime of violence. Arapahoe County wanted him extradited, flown to Colorado, to finally face a jury. Ewing said no, and his legal team went to war. Motion after motion, filing after filing. Fighting the transfer at every level. Nevada courts, federal appeals, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. 20 months. That's how long the extradition fight lasted. Nearly 2 years of legal resistance from a man who'd spent 36 years never charged with anything in Colorado. The Supreme Court declined to intervene. The last door closed. Late February 2020. Alex Ewing is loaded onto a state aircraft, flown to Centennial Airport, driven directly to the Arapahoe County Detention Center, held without bail. Days later, his first court appearance. Red jail jumpsuit, orange sandals, a chain running from his handcuffs down to his ankles. The hearing lasted nearly an hour, and in that entire hour, Ewing spoke exactly 5 times. The same 2 words each time. Yes, ma'am. Outside that courthouse, word reached the Bennett family. After 36 years, there was finally a face, a name. A man in a Colorado courtroom, Connie Bennett, the mother who opened that door in 1984, was now in her 80s. She had outlived the wait. So that's it, right? DNA match. One in a database of millions. Case closed. Not even close. Because when this went to trial, the defense stood up and pointed at something nobody expected. 31 fingerprints. Lifted from inside the Bennett home. And not one of them belonged to Alex Ewing. Final chapter, bestie. Bringing it home. Fresh angle. We open inside the courtroom itself. Trial tension played fair to both sides. Clean landing. CTA #3 as the very last spoken line. Chapter 5. 31 fingerprints. Picture a courtroom in the summer of 2021. Arapahoe County, Colorado. For 37 years, this case existed as a file. A box. A number. Now, for the first time, there's an actual person in the defendant's chair. Alex Ewing, 60 years old now, on trial for the Bennett murders. Prosecutors came loaded, 25 witnesses, and one of them stopped the room cold. Vanessa Bennett, the 3-year-old from that bedroom, now a grown woman, taking the stand to describe what fragments she could of a night she was too young to fully hold. The survivor finally speaking, 37 years late, but speaking. The most consequential witness, though, wasn't a person from that night. It was a scientist, Yvonne Missy Woods, DNA analyst. Colorado Bureau of Investigation. She walked the jury through the evidence. Genetic material recovered from a bedroom comforter. Tested once in 2001. Tested again in 2018. Matched to Ewing both times. 2 separate tests. 17 years apart. Same answer. Then she gave the jury a number. The odds that DNA belonged to anyone else on Earth. 1 in 3 nonillion. That's a 1. Followed by 30 zeros. A number so far past human understanding. Woods spent part of her testimony just explaining what certainty like that means. There are 8 billion people alive. That number makes 8 billion. Look like a rounding error. Prosecutors also brought in Patricia Smith, not as a charge in this trial, under strict legal limits, as proof of a pattern. Same method, 6 days apart. Linked by DNA since 2002, so that's the case. A mountain of a number, a pattern, a survivor on the stand, open and shut. Right? Then the defense stood up, and this trial stopped feeling like a formality. A fingerprint examiner took the stand and testified to something remarkable. 31 fingerprints, recovered from inside the Bennett home in 1984. 31. And the number belonging to Alex Ewing? 0. Not 1. Let that hang there. The way the defense wanted the jury to. And they weren't done. Defense attorneys attacked the evidence chain itself. They argued the original 1984 investigators handled key evidence without gloves. Standard practice back then. Unthinkable now. Then 36 years of storage. Transfers between facilities. Retesting. Every handoff. Another chance for contamination. That was their argument. At one point, the defense formally moved for a mistrial over exactly how that evidence had been handled. And look, strip away the drama, and the jury faced a genuinely hard question, an honest one. On one side, a DNA number bigger than comprehension. On the other, a crime scene with 31 prints, and zero physical trace of the accused, anywhere inside that house. Does the number outweigh the absence? That was the whole trial, compressed into one question. In closing arguments, prosecutors walked the math one more time. 1 in 3 nonillion. The defense asked jurors to weigh the silence. 31 fingerprints. None of them his. The jury deliberated for 2 days, and on August 6, 2021, they returned their verdict. Guilty. On every single count. 11 days later, came sentencing. Judge Darren Vall told Ewing these crimes were among the most severe he'd encountered in 25 years on the bench. 3 consecutive life sentences. Under the law as it stood in 1984, enough to guarantee one thing: Ewing will die in custody. But Colorado wasn't finished. Patricia Smith was still owed her own trial. Spring 2022. Jefferson County. A second jury. 9 women. 3 men. A case built again on DNA evidence, and challenged again over decades of evidence handling. During those proceedings, Ewing addressed the court himself, unprompted. He insisted the system was rigged against him, claimed he'd pointed investigators toward other suspects, and been dismissed every time. The same position he'd held since that very first prison interview. The second jury reached the same conclusion as the first. Guilty. 2 juries, 2 counties, 2 years. 1 answer. Afterward, Patricia Smith's family released a statement. They spoke of imagining how much fuller their lives might have been with her in them, and of how hard it once was to imagine her case ever being anything but a mystery. 38 years. It was no longer a mystery. And Vanessa? She's in her early 40s now. Married name. She still carries a metal plate in her forehead. Years of physical therapy behind her. And decades of rebuilding. A life that one night in 1984 tried to take before it started. In court, she addressed the judge directly. She spoke about everything that night took from her. Her parents, her sister, her trust in people. The person she was supposed to become. She waited most of her life to say those words in a courtroom. And she got to say them. Connie Bennett, the woman whose key opened this whole story, stood outside the courthouse in her 80s. And she was honest in a way. Most people wouldn't be. She said it wasn't closure. They still live with it every day. But it felt like a weight had finally been lifted. After 37 years, she could finally picture the person responsible as something other than a shape in the snow. So go back one last time to that garage door, left open, forgotten, completely unremarkable, on a street where every house did the same. This was never a lesson about garage doors. It's about how much of what protects us was never really built to stop anyone. It works because almost nobody ever tests it. Until the one night, someone does. So before you go, I want your take on 3 things. The defense proved 31 fingerprints, and not one belonged to Ewing. Does that shake your certainty at all? Or does 1 in 3 nonillion settle it completely? Drop your answer below. Second, Patricia Smith's case sat unsolved for 38 years. How many other cases are sitting in a database right now, waiting on one swab to walk through the door? And third, Vanessa survived at 3 years old and built an entire life afterward. What does that actually take? I genuinely want to read your thoughts. If this case stayed with you, hit like right now and subscribe to Crime Watch Hub. Because somewhere in a cold case database tonight, another profile is waiting on its match. And when it breaks, you'll want to be here when we cover it. See you at the next case.